Hi, you're watching BloombergQuint here in Davos, and I have with me one of the most important voices here, Professor Fan. Professor Fan is of the National Economic Research Institute of the China Reform Foundation. He is one of the most renowned economists in China and a strong advocate for reform. He's consulted with many government departments in China and has also been a member of the PBOC's MPC, that's the Monetary Policy Committee, as well as a consultant to many international institutions such as the World Bank. Professor Fan, thank you very much for joining us here. Davos begins on the back of the announcement of the Phase 1 trade deal between U.S. and China. Do you believe that this is a sustainable toll in, the freeze that we've seen over the last couple of years, or do you believe that it's only just temporary?
Well, have an agreement is better than none, right? But I don't think this is solved all the problems between two countries. Okay. On one side, the trade deficit of U.S. it's hard to be, eliminated by selling China the primary goods, the bean, the pork, the gas, from a technology most advanced country. You are not selling us your advantageous goods, but all those primary goods. I don't think that will be sustainable. That's one thing.
Okay.
Secondly, the decoupling effort by some Americans are not stopping. So it's still going on, and a lot of things are not in this agreement.
Right.
So I would say this is a good thing, but not yet solve all the problems. So we needed to make more effort to improve the situation and the relationship between the two countries.
Do you believe that effort is possible in a year where we are going to see presidential elections in the U.S. and this has been a political point to score?
Yeah. Well, this is kind of the uncertainty which this disagreement didn't remove, because if things are determined by the domestic politics, it could be very damaging for the international relations. So we don't know when it's necessary for the domestic politics. Somebody will oppose more sanction or more, the tariff, and when the negotiations for the Phase 2 will start, it's all uncertain. So that's not really good thing for both countries, I would say.
The other point of news that we just got a couple of weeks ago is that China's GDP grew at 6.1%, the lowest since 1990, but not a bad number given that last year was a difficult year. What do you make of this kind of GDP growth, the internals contributing to this growth, and what that means for not just this year, but this entire decade for Chinese growth?
Right. Well, the Chinese economy is a large economy. That means the outside factor may have an impact, but mainly from domestic reasons.
Absolutely.
So the trade war make the negative impact, but main reason for this downturn is because of the domestic, overcapacity issue have not yet totally removed, and the market clearing is not finished. But things are getting better. It's stabilizing, and the market clearing is going on, and it's going to be finished. I mean, in the last phase of the transition. So we would expect that the economy in 2020 will be stabilized. One thing, if there's no higher growth, but at least it will stabilize at around the 6%. And then the next stage will be determined by how much reform and how much structural changes would really take place in the economy.
When you speak of reform and structural change, one of the big shifts that has been underway in China is the move away from an investment-led economy to a consumption-led economy. How do you assess the success of that shift by the Chinese authorities? And do you believe that what will be the next stage of reform as you speak that will dominate this decade?
Yeah, the consumption now really is growing as a part of the GDP and as a contributor to the GDP growth. The reasons are really solid for this kind of change. Number one, by the end of the 2019, China's per capita GDP reached $10,000 US dollars.
Yes.
So this is a trademark. This is a milestone, milestones, and that indicate that the people really have the money now for the consumption. Number one. Number two, social securities have been really reformed and really now start to function for Chinese consumers. Not only the urban people, the rural people now got some basic securities. So that will make a big contribution for the lower saving but a higher consumption. And also, this digital things really improve. Before we didn't have this so-called consumer credit. Now, by the internet, it's really growing very fast. And the commercial, e-commerce, that's really fascinating. And also a very important thing is that before China's saving rate is high because this saving is so low. This saving means old people. They didn't save much money before, and after retirement they are not going to spend much money. But after the 40 years, the people have the savings, people have the money, now retire. So the structure of the economy, the population, really changing. So that will also make the consumption continue to grow in the next decades.
So I believe that the investment contributes about 31% to GDP. Consumption is now at 51%.
Yeah.
What do you believe would be the ideal balance that the Chinese authorities will be able to strike in the course of this decade? How much more down the road does China need to go?
Right. Well, at this stage of development, actually, as an economist, I do not want to see the investment going too low. Because the saving rate is still 43, 42%.
Right.
So to utilize those, savings, you need some investment. And also, China's investment in the social capital, in terms of the infrastructures, urbanizations, you still need the investment. And China now is going to second phase of the urbanization. In the early phase, you have the small cities grow up, but also big cities. But now the government finally adopted the policy encouraging so-called big metropolitan area development. Right. You may heard, the Hong Kong, the Shenzhen area, and also Shanghai. That's a big area for the urbanization. It's a group of cities too. So that also needs some investment. That will lay a better foundation for the future growth of consumption. So I would say at the moment, this structure, this is the percentage, the ratio between this consumption and the investment is okay. I would like to see that will stay for a while, say 3 years, 5 years. Then go down further. We calculated many years ago, say if China have basic equity of the income, the better the ratio is something like 25 to 65.
25 to 65.
Yeah.
So you're not very far away from that at this point in time.
Not very far away.
Okay. You mentioned, Professor Fan, that the overcapacity issue in China has yet to fully play out.
Yeah.
How much longer do you think that will take? And I'm going to juxtapose that question with the second point that, whilst we did think that these trade tensions will hurt China in some way, from what I understand, exports have gone down only marginally. China has been able to redirect exports to other nations, and whilst these trade tensions need to be resolved, right. They're more a political resolution than just an economic resolution. So where are we in the sort of the cleaning out of the overcapacity issue? Yeah. And do you see export playing a bigger role in that cleaning out, or will it have to be any other resolution?
Okay, the overcapacity mainly is related to the investment. Too much investment and it created too much demand for those investment goods, not really export.
Yes.
Export continued to be at a high level, but in recent years, because of trade friction with some countries, now is growing marginally. However, China's export to other countries, emerging market, including India, Russia, and also ASEAN, Africa, other market is really growing. Last year our export to U.S. was down by some 14%. But overall, export continued to grow by 2.3 percentage. That means our export to other countries still growing.
Yes.
So I'm not saying the export will play the role like in 10 years ago, 20 years ago, contribute too much to the growth. But I would not saying it will be decline or it will disappear. China's capacity of this export is to continue to be strong, and if we can do more to the to the opening up further, to remove some restrictions for foreign capitals, then the growth of the export, including the export from the multinationals in China, will continue to be the part of the growth story.
You don't believe that continuing strong growth of exports is what will help resolve the overinvestment, overcapacity issue? Is there another resolution that you expect will play out over the next few years?
It play part of the role, but definitely not the main part of the role, because this is mainly for the investment. Investment means infrastructures,
right.
Domestic, those kind of the heavy industries. So that's not really the export. Export mainly the light industry,
right?
The electronic, all those things. So it plays some roles, but not the key for this cleanup.
So this overcapacity issue, how long will it take to resolve?
Basically, I will argue it in the last stage.
It's in the last stage.
Last stage. Hopefully, 2020 we'll see. Basically, it will be over. Well, it took too long. From the beginning of last century to the end of the last century. So that's a little bit too long. That means so-called soft landing. Soft landing. The good part is we didn't have the we didn't have the negative growth, but soft landing means it took too long.
Yeah. Professor Fan, would you then say that if the overcapacity issue is dealt with this year and maybe next, that there will be maybe scope for additional investment in the Chinese economy? The reason I ask is because in the last decade, it is this investment that has powered growth across the world. And so I'm curious to know what that will mean for the global economy. China has been a critical engine of growth for the global economy.
Yeah. Actually, in beginning of 2018, before the trade war started, China's investment, including the private sector investment, really was growing, but then stopped by the this trade friction. So I would expect that if those market clearing finished, if we have the phase one agreement in really played roles, I would say in 2020 the investment will rebound a little bit, and in the future I don't think China investment was not growing as fast as before, but we still need a lot of the investment, particularly this urbanization process, So from that, and also the industries, new industry, new technology, and all the Chinese companies are really making investment plan for that. So from that point of view, I would say investment growth is extremely important, and that will create a big demand for the world market.
The last time we saw this kind of investment growth in China, maybe at higher levels, we saw commodity super cycle play out. This time around, because this is the second level of growth in China, what kind of impact will it have qualitatively on world growth? Will it be on commodities, or will it be in other areas where Chinese demand will then either raise production across the world or prices?
Hopefully not. Hopefully not like last time. And this time the growth will be moderate.
Moderate.
Yeah. Last time all the bubble created by the, fast growth. I mean, if the growth is too fast, then you create the, the imagination, all the bubbles, it will take place. But if it's moderate, people will be rational to calculate, how much. And the market will not have that kind of favor. So from that point of view, the demand will continue. So that will have a positive impact on the commodity market, but not really the, the bubble impact. So hopefully this time could be more stabilized.
Okay. You've been a strong advocate of reform in China. What is the unfinished agenda that you expect or you hope will play out over the next 10 years?
Yeah. Well, the reason Chinese government adopt a lot of the opening up policies, that's a part of the reform. We need a market access for all people, not only the foreign company, but also the private sector, the domestic private sector. So that's a very important reform. It's a set of institutions and the policies, for the development, particularly for the development of the private sector, and also complemented by the foreign companies. Now China has more opening, so that's a very important part: market access, market opening. And secondly, is also the relationship between the government and the company, including the issue of state company issue. So that's still create quite a lot of the distortion of the market, particularly domestic market. So that's really important for the future. And also, we need a further reform of the social security system. For the so-called, now we call it stakeholder development, and to avoid the income disparity become too big, and to avoid the social crisis. So that's also a very important part of the reforms.
Do you see in this decade, 2020 to 2030, China's private sector enterprises leading the way, as opposed to the last 2 decades where it has been state-owned enterprises?
Yes or no? I believe now most people, including the leadership, understand we need a private sector. Particularly, we need a private sector play the role of leading the technology revolution. So the investment, the project by the private sector really fascinating. But for the whole economy, the state sector is still play the big roles. They have so much money, they have so much capital. They have to play the role, and of course they need some reform. They need to give up some roles for the private sector, but they need it. We need it. We created, accumulated so much capital, and all invest. A lot of them invest in the state companies. So we need a state company to play the role, including the resources, including the transportations, infrastructures, all these public goods things. We still need we're in the stage of the urbanization, so we need that kind of the public goods to be provided. So I would say both. Hopefully more roles for the private sector, but we still have the state sector, in the economy, very strong role.
In the last few years, because of the dominance of state-owned enterprises and a state-led development model, there has been much concern around asset quality in China, around bad loans, around shadow banking.
Yeah.
Where does China stand in the cleaning out process? We don't hear enough about how much has been done and how much is yet to be done.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the things are not very clear for us as well. So, because a lot of things are hidden. It's supposed to be hidden. It's suppose you are not known how much because it's hidden. But I would say a lot of the stories. But you add up all those stories, as a percentage of the economy, it's still not big. So China, in some sense, Chinese financial system play safeguard too much, in a sense. For example, banks, it scarcely gave any credit loans everything is mortgaged. Everything has been securitized one way or another. So they don't take that much risk. All the risk in the company. So overall, you can say there's a problems, but overall, it's not a really big deal as a part of the economy, as a part of the financial assets. So I would say, and the new things like P2P, like social, lending. There's new issues, new problems, but still, by the size of the total problem over the overall assets, still handleable in a sense. Still not really, going to create a crisis. So now we are in the transition to also to clean up this kind of things. That will take some time, but it's not really put too much pressure on the financial sector. They are still functioning in financing the project in the industries. They are still functioning to the consumption. Consumer credit is really not growing very fast, particularly by the internet. So I say the problem is there, but not the problem like you can create a crisis like in 08, that kind of financial crisis. No.
Okay, you spoke of a revival in investment maybe next year onwards once this overcapacity issues are out of the way. We've spoken of maybe certain new sets of reforms playing out over this decade. There has also been in the last several months a shift in policy in China towards a more fiscal policy orientation. The several tax cuts that have taken place, I think over $200 billion in tax cuts that have been given away. Will that continue to be the main thrust versus monetary policy when it comes to fostering growth in China?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, actually, Chinese economy has suffered. This is a problem of the so-called liquidity trap, meaning that the banking sector have the money, but they cannot find a better project. So because there's demand in the market is still low. So that's why we need to rely on the fiscal policy more. You need the government spend some money, create the demand, and then you make the whole economy start to roll on. So that's why I think this is a situation of the moment. And I believe for the next, this year, next year, maybe basically this is the situation.
Okay, so fiscal policy will continue to dominate in the next couple of years.
Yeah, government have the limit for the fiscal policy, but government also have the potential to play the better fiscal policy. Particularly in the relationship between the local government and the central government. China's economy is complicated by that very much. So if they can play that well, if they can really, to utilize those leverage for the local government, then I believe they can play a better role.
So we'll continue to see more fiscal pushes in the frame of tax cuts or more spending towards local governments, is what
that's right.
What kind of role, in terms of economic leadership, do you see plus and a minus for several countries, especially neighbors like India? Chinese demand can pull up many of our industries and our economic growth, but equally, growing economic superiority also creates geopolitical tensions. So what kind of leadership role do you expect China to play in this decade?
Well, maybe, China, if China continue to grow, then China's growth make contribution to lead the global growth, right? China now contribute to something like 30% of the total growth of the global economy. So that's the one thing we need to expect it. And secondly, I think that China really can play some role in keeping or pushing forward the globalization. The multilateralism China needed. That's really in China's own interest. So that maybe is not maybe leading role, but the important role in that direction.
Professor Fan, thank you so much for your time and your insights into China.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you, sir.
My pleasure too.
Thank you.
Thank you.